Well, welcome everyone to this session. This is your session. This has come out of something that happened in Australia where we have a vocabulary service, and we did a review of this, and the users were starting to say we're getting a bit overwhelmed. For example, if you type in a concept on boreholes, the users are getting the choice of about 5 vocabs. And so this is more about the proliferation that is clearly emerging in vocabs. And is there something we need to do about it? Is everyone aware of it? What do we do about it? So what we've got in this fairly easily is that we're going to have 3 presentations from Simon, John Graybill and Adrian, which set the scene for where we think this is an issue. We've then developed 6 breakout topics. And in those breakout topics, you'll be asked to share guidelines or share opinions on that particular topic. And then we'll have a stop, go button where we say, yes, we really need to pursue this further. And then it's your call. Where, who, how do we proceed with it? So just in the preamble, we have a definition of vocabulary as applied to this session. And thank you, John, for writing it and suggesting we need it. So it's covering anything, a highly sophisticated ontology or a grab bag of terms. We've also then developed a resources section, if you can start to scroll through that slowly, Erin. So number 1 is some reviews on vocabs. Please add to it if you know about them. The next section is the list of vocabularies that we will be talking about mainly in this session. Next, Erin. There's the catalogue of vocabs that we're starting to develop in RDA. Then we've got a list of vocabs. These are resources. Feel free to add. Keep going, Erin. And then the next one is other groups working on vocabularies that we know about. Again, please add to them. So without further ado, we'll just move into the presentations, starting with Simon and his perspective on this topic. Thank you, Simon.
Okay, I'm trying to share. I think you've got my screen now, right?
Correct.
Okay, thanks, John, for the thumbs up. Right, so really I'm just going to introduce the topic. We've coordinated a bit with the different speakers here, so I don't, John will go into a lot more detail on specifics. So I'm really just, and Adrian, on the way that specific services are managing this issue. So I'm really going to do a motivator here, and also a little bit of a shout out to some recent work that's been going on within ESIP. So the title's a question: is it a feature or a bug that there is proliferation of vocabularies and vocabulary services? So here's just a little bit of a motivation for why we need controlled vocabularies. We have a bit of a challenge in Australia, which is when you ask for a beer in different states, if you use the same word, you'll get different sizes. For example, a small one can vary, particularly between Tasmania and Victoria, and even worse when you get to a pot, where a pot in WA is twice as big as a pot in Victoria or Queensland. So words aren't always enough. You need to know the context, the scope, and the definitions for the words. But words are sometimes too much. In a project we did a few years ago, we were looking at harmonizing a bunch of data sets on water quality, and we found, sorry about that, we found that we had data sets which had got all of these things in as the observed property in some water quality data, and it wasn't entirely clear whether those data should be merged or not. Or something about nitrogen in that case. And I think in this community, we're more or less resolved and accepting of the idea that instead of terms, you're better off using more formal identifiers to denote concepts or terms from vocabularies. which and those identifiers in the web world are URIs. So for nitrogen, we can look in one of the best sources of chemistry definitions, a thing called KEBI from the OVO Foundation, and still it's confusing because there's all these different potential entries for nitrogen or nitrate, which is probably more the point when you're looking in water quality data. But and so we years ago now were setting up a service where we took some of these definitions and elaborated on them and put together some combinations and also published those at URIs. So there's a problem here, or there's a challenge, which is there's a lot of terms. There's, even when you go to URIs, you've got a lot of choices to make. I just, in preparation for this, I went and looked up the term soil in a bunch of vocabulary services and soil or soils, and there's a lot of options there. And I, deliberately sort of cast around a wide variety of vocabulary services here, but these are all live URIs which might be used to denote the term soil. And they come from a lot of different places, including strange ones like the medical subject headings and the render tissue and enzyme source ontology, but also some big sort of well-known generic sources like Wikidata, DBpedia, much more precise ones like the environment ontology, agrosemantics. Let's just look at a couple of these. First, ask the question, why are there so many definitions? Why are they so different? Well, I've just preserved the list of the sources of those terms on the right-hand side here, because really that's the key to it, which is these different vocabularies and vocabulary services have different goals, different purposes. Some of them are annotation for discovery, some annotation for accounting. Those are the ANZ ones, where it's used for statistical analysis of research projects. Classification of observations for processing, reasoning, and logic. This one I put in, and I'll explain this a little bit later, signposting. Also around the reason why there's so many different ones is they come from different places. They've got different provenance, different projects started at different times, developed their vocabulary, their controlled vocabularies. At some point or other, they decided they wanted to publish them to be used more broadly, but whether they got adopted, why they needed to stay independent, why was never entirely reconciled. And in particular, they come from different target communities, different jurisdictions, different audiences, different levels of technical sophistication. The jurisdictions thing is important. Why have we got Australia and New Zealand ones when we're dealing with a global science community? Well, it's also to allow them to fit in with maybe some regulatory environment in a local in a particular governance area. So, and then there is the matter of expressiveness. Some of these are, and that's really what my next slide is going to go on and explore a bit, with different levels of axiomatization. Some of them are just terms and definitions. Some of them are terms and definitions organized in hierarchies. Some of them have a bit more, some specific properties, and you get all the way over into the highly axiomatized things from OVO with the relations ontology and such like. So looking at just a couple of these, Library of Congress has got an entry for soils, but it turns out this is primarily designed to allow people to put books on shelves, or the modern equivalent. It's to sort major resources. Here are entered works on natural soils is the definition. The agricultural thesaurus, GACS, is a bit, has got similar level of expressivity, but it comes from a project called Agri-Semantics, and so it was aimed specifically at the agriculture community, and has a lot of related concepts there, which are related to agricultural productivity, for example. And then if we look in, the one which currently I think we know is the most highly axiomatized, they're most detailed. We find that soil is in an amazing hierarchy, starting out from the very so highly conceptual upper ontology BFO. A long way down there is a set of environmental materials, and interesting to see that outer space is considered to be an environmental material. But in this context, it makes sense. But what's particularly interesting in ENVO is this set of axioms, which makes a much more precise definition, which allows, in that case, if soil occurs in a data set, for you to be able to reason over that for discovery or combining it with other data sets in a machine operable way, rather than, or at least that's the goal. So that's the part there. So different needs lead to many vocabularies. And how might we manage this diversity? Well, you know, some people think there should be one rule, one to rule them all. You know, that ain't going to happen. So we've got a few sort of technical tricks we can use in the context of the representations that we use with mapping and matching assertions. And so looking at what we might do with some of those ones that I just found for soils, and here I'm picking out a definition out of Sweet here now, sorry, the class out of Sweet called soil, and you know, suggesting that one might map it to some of those other ones that I was that I showed in the original list, by perhaps embedding mapping properties within Sweet itself. That sort of puts Sweet in a particular position, and or maybe subordinate to all of these other ones. And there's other approaches that you might use, which might be to manage a set of mapping statements in some other place in a separate graph. But then that begs the question as to where would that be? Something that's just, you know, this is relatively hot off the press. Sweet has long suffered from the fact that it had a lot of URIs and almost no annotations, no definitions, almost no labels. There's been work going on under Lewis McGibney and others in the semantics group in ESIP to fix this now. And the most recent idea is to pull in the definitions from Wikidata. So, for example, but not only pull in those definitions, but make it clear that that's where that annotation comes from, with the source link there saying this is where this definition comes from. So you might also expand that further and you know, include definitions from those other places as well. And as long as they're all annotated to say this is where this annotation comes from, then no one's pulling the wool over anyone else's eyes, and you're essentially saying, you know, we've got this idea, and here's a set of potential definitions to add to the sort of loose semantics, which is already there from where soil sits in its hierarchy as a subclass of sediment. And that sort of puts, perhaps allows us to look at, gives a role for Sweet, because there's been a bit of a sort of a debate about, you know, Sweet's important because it's been around a long time, but it's got some challenges. So what is it? What is its role? Perhaps there's a traffic cop for definitions.
Simon, you have 1 minute.
I'm just about to finish, Leslie. Okay. So I started out with the question, proliferation of vocabularies and services, feature or bug. Yesterday, I came across Betteridge's law of headlines, which says that any headline that ends in a question mark can be answered with the word no. Not quite sure if no is an answer to the question feature or bug, but I tend to lean on the side of feature. Thanks.
Thank you, Simon. We'll now, if you've got any questions of Simon or the speakers, can you please type them into the notes page? Can we now pass on to John, who's going to deliver 50 slides in 5 minutes? Thank you, John.
You're welcome. Thank you for that challenging introduction. And we won't have any time for specifics. Sorry, Simon, thanks for that suggestion. So hold on your hat, but you'll be able to read the slides later. And are we seeing one display or is it a little tiny thing? I don't think it displayed quite right. Are you seeing the display okay?
We're seeing nothing.
We're seeing black.
Well, that's different than the last time I did it 10 seconds ago.
Now we've got it, John.
Okay. Good. But when I pressed present the last time, yes.
So what I discovered is you have to press present and then share. Don't do it in this order.
Yeah.
Because it'll present it on a different screen. So present first, then share.
Okay. When I did that last time, that didn't work either, but
Try just pressing present now, John. Let's just give it one more shot.
All right.
There you go.
Good.
That's more like it. Thank you. Okay, hope that didn't count against me. So I'm going to present the ideas of or approaches or projects that have illustrated some of the different ways of classifying and deciding on vocabularies. One of the first of these I was exposed to was the decree approach, where for 2008 meeting of IODE JCOM, I was defining basic evaluation criteria for a set of vocabularies and trying to evaluate the available vocabularies against these criteria. There's a whole paper of them in that one slide. And a number of different qualities came up and we thought, well, pick the best ones out of the ones that met all of these qualifications. And unfortunately, none of them met all the qualifications. One or two came close, but none of these could clearly be anointed as a really well-managed vocabulary. So we won't go over those detailed evaluations now, but it came up with some recommendations, including that collecting all the terms and harmonizing might be a really useful project to fund. Didn't get funded, but that's one of the notions, was to do that. Another idea then was to create a repository that can hold all of the vocabularies. About 3 or 4 or 6 different groups had this idea at the same time. I call this the shopping approach, where if you create a single place where everyone can find everything, they can compare them. But even by 2012, the different repositories, of which these are just a couple of examples, were able to provide some very nice collections of vocabularies, relatively speaking, but it still wasn't very complete. That's the basic metadata and search approach, where, well, I can look up the metadata of these things, or I can look up some terms maybe, but I can't really tell what the differences are very easily. Third approach was to create a single ontology framework where everyone is putting their ontologies into a single set, and there can't be any overlaps. Everybody has to fit into their slot, and all the domains are addressed with a single approach. That's more or less the unification approach. And again, by 2012, the selection and the product labeling was improving quite a bit. In fact, you could start to compare these different ontologies and how their qualities were compared to the standard. And so you also got a curated and consistent set of ontologies this way, which is extremely valuable for a lot of users. It's a very powerful approach to simplify things. Another approach is to socially review the vocabulary for goodness. And so that involves people or groups reviewing ontologies via star ratings or publications and publishing those rankings, and might even be by word of mouth. The problem here is the criteria can be pretty subjective. What's the purpose that we're rating them for? And it's also very social, and there's no single place where you can go to find out what everybody seems to think. So although various places have tried this, it hasn't always stuck as a good method, because it turns out everybody wants something different. Going slightly out of order here. The idea of making recommendations based on text and keywords was another idea, where you could actually do matches given a set of text and say, how close is this ontology to meeting your set of text? And You could also consider other characteristics like popularity of the ontology or size and so on. But there's a lot of different ways to measure popularity, and the broader metrics and qualities of the ontology are of great interest to various people. So that wasn't a total solution, but it's still a pretty nice solution in the bioportal anyway. And another approach was to evaluate the quality of the ontology by defining metrics for the ontology. Typically, these would be professional criteria that reflect good practices, and therefore they tend to be sort of advanced, and maybe they are a little too advanced for the average user and not always done in the same way. There are a lot of evaluators like this, and so it's not like you can walk into one and go boom and say, that's the ontology I want to use, or those are the terms I want to use.
1 minute
So,
left, John.
Perfect. So we end up with this list of things that you can use to decide, which is actually a lot of work if you think about it. And so the basic qualities are listed on the right side. The other kinds of things that you might care about are on the left side. It turns out discoverability is really important. If you can't find the ontology, then you don't really care about it because you won't know. This is my final answer for people who are in this room wondering what the final answer is. If you know you want a single integrated model, start with the Oboe Foundry. Because it's a nice setup, but it doesn't have so much Earth system stuff yet. If you have sets of text or keywords, here are a couple of systems that have recommendation engines. Ask the people in your domain what vocabularies they know about and like. If it's not in a repository, you can add it to some of these. Mix and match, you're going to have to mix and match terms. I'm sorry, it's almost impossible to find one that works for everything. And know that the most important thing you're doing is combining these different terms into a single resource that is computable, so you can improve it later. Just left some references for you there. Thank you for the time, and I look forward to the rest of the session.
Okay.
I will stop sharing any second.
Yes. Thank you, John. And as I've said, I've put a note in the chat. Top of page 3, you can put your questions to Simon, John, and now we'll move on to Adrian. And Simon and John have talked about the perspective from the vocabulary ontology. Adrian is now going to talk about perspectives from running a vocabulary service. So Adrian, you have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you, Leslie. Can you hear me all right and see the slide?
Yep, going well.
Great. Very good. All right. Well, yes, I'm going to talk to you about, oh, sorry, I'm not going to talk to you about anything. My slides just, yes, there we are.
Just go to the next.
Yes, so I'm going to talk to you about a service that we operate here in Australia. I'm part of the NCRIS system in Australia, which is National Collaborative Research Infrastructure. There's a number of national facilities that sort of focus on either different technology types or different domain sciences. Down the bottom there, it says that we are accessible to publicly and privately funded users across Australia and internationally. So we had this, we come from an approach that says if you're going to run a service, and in this case, I'm going to talk to you about the Research Vocabularies Australia service, that it is open to everyone and that anyone could come in and use it or publish a vocabulary. So from that, and I've got, again, my slides are in not the same order, same problem as John had actually. We had a postmodern approach, I think. I didn't have the opportunity of having seen John's nice ontology of approaches to this, but ours is, I've classified as a postmodern approach, meaning that anyone who comes to you, anyone who wants to publish a vocabulary in our service has access to that vocabulary sharing infrastructure. It was a very sort of democratic, everyone has a forum, and because it comes from government-funded infrastructure, that thing about access was just an assumption. The second one was that we don't take an editorial stance. Now, part of that is kind of part of the academic approach that, you know, if I have a way of doing a taxonomy of eucalyptus trees and someone else has a slightly different one, that we were not going to block access to our service just on the basis of different types of approaches to classification. And the third one was, if there were competing classification or worldviews, then if we were to have them available, defined, and using the same knowledge organization system, that we could allow mappings, correspondences amongst them. So I'm not a philosopher, I'm a lapsed linguist, but the idea here was it was postmodern in the sense of every view can be valid depending on, you know, how you sort of approach it, and that so that was the kind of DNA behind the setup of the service. Then, and over a number of years, we've collected quite a variety of content from different publishers in Australia and other important international ones that would be used by people. In 2019, we embarked on a sort of public consultation around the service, a review, and we actually got the feedback that people were looking for. I've just highlighted, this is one of the butcher paper things that came out of it. People wanting recommendations. They want to know if it's authoritative. Actually want to know, you know, how do you go to approve a vocabulary? So we were getting feedback that, you know, and this is from the actual review document itself, which I should point out that Simon, our first speaker, was one of the authors of the review. People were saying it wasn't clear, you know, there is such a thing as an authoritative data set. How do we know if there's an authoritative vocabulary in a particular area? If there is, you know, how is it identified within the service? And there's the example that that Leslie was talking about, that you know, you could find boreholes, and here we've got actually 3 different definitions of borehole from the same organization. It's not, you know, we also have vocabularies from different organizations as well. So we were getting a critique of our postmodern sort of stance that, you know, anything goes. People were looking for, I think that is the critique of postmodernism, that it doesn't give you a moral compass, it doesn't give you any axioms to run your life by, that you're constantly questioning. So the users were giving us that feedback that, you know, there wasn't enough kind of direction from a community lens point of view. So these are the 2 directions that were identified in the review of our service, that we should look harder at vocabulary selection and endorsement from the community. We should look at vocabulary governance and content, because they were the kind of things, as John pointed out, that people were making their selections based on. So where are we with our postmodern project?
You have 1 minute, Adrian.
Perfect, this is our last slide. With our postmodern project, we're establishing an information standards advisory panel based on the other national facilities that we're part of the same infrastructure family for. And among that, we're trying to define enough of the context, help the person who's trying to find a vocabulary use it, you know, in the proper context, that, you know, make a proper informed choice about the vocabulary. And the key thing is the last one, you know that a vocabulary that they select is fit for a particular purpose. So we haven't gone the full back to the modernist project, where there is just one purpose and, you know, we tell you what your life is about. We're trying to identify a number of purposes and then say, look, if this is the purpose of that, you know, for your vocabulary, then these are the kind of vocabularies that you might want. And we're going back to a set of community people from the community themselves saying, well, you know, here's the ones that we generally use in our community. And I liked Wikipedia saying that I think where we've got to is an informed naivety or a pragmatic idealism or a moderate fanaticism. So I believe that really does sum up our new direction. Thanks.
Thank you, Adrian. Erin, can you pull up the agenda again, please? So now we're going to go into breakouts. Yes. And the breakouts are, sorry, got a bit of an Australian flavour. So Simon and Adrian and I kind of designed them. And what we want you to do is to choose which one you want to go into. And I will now, just so we can see, each breakout goes to a breakout room, and maybe you'll get Erin to explain again. No, just stay there. Oh, right, okay. And so what I'll ask is, could each leader of a breakout unmute themselves and just give people a flavour of what they're going to be doing in their session to help you decide which one. So my breakout is pretty simple. We've got these vocabularies. Can we, like the 5-star Berners Lee category, have something that indicates to people, well, you're choosing a bag of terms, that's all that we have, and so you have to use it, versus a top quality vocabulary that's got governance, multilingual, RDF linked, etc., if with URIs. So what are the criteria that we can easily put against vocabularies in our vocabulary service that gives a user a guide to what is there? Pierre, I'll hand over to you to introduce your breakout session, please.
Sure. Yeah. So in the breakout session that I'll host, we'll talk about the actual mapping processes, picking up on some of the discussions we've had with semantic harmonization and also with other approaches. So we know we need to interoperate. So we know we need to crosswalk between different resources that do different things. I think the presentations just before made the case. But how do we do that? Can we come up with a convention? Is there an efficient way to do that? Where should we store it technically, socially, etc.? So we can discuss all of those things there, get some ideas put down and share that with the relevant clusters and committees to actualize it.
Lewis, can you introduce your breakout, please?
Absolutely, absolutely. Hopefully you can hear me, folks. Very quickly here, desired outcomes. Picking up, I think, from where John Graybiel has just spoken there, the whole issue of discoverability, search and maybe access to resources before you doing work is, I think, is an issue which we want to consider from the community ontology repository perspective. How easy is it right now for folk to understand what the access patterns are for discovering information in core? So that's where we're going to start off. We're then going to look at some of the issues highlighted at the top level by this entire session description round about trustability, stability of data sources within core and how those are determined. Again, this is kind of highlighting it. Before you go and do all the work, is there a trusted source already available to you? So that's where we'll get to in the middle. And then the final one is, I think, getting feedback from folks, or at least discussing on what work the core cluster needs to do to let people know what we're actually doing on a month-to-month basis, you know, and what do the daily activities look like, and how is that more adequately communicated to folks? These may be some things round about new things we've added to discoverability, to access, etc. So I just kind of want to fill the session with that outreach that maybe needs to be done.
Thank you, Lewis. Rowan, can you introduce your session, please?
Thanks, Leslie. Well, we'll be looking at what does successful vocabulary governance look like, and how may governance help address vocabulary proliferation. We'll have some very brief presentations from representatives from 3 vocabulary providers to get a sense of what works, or what they've found it works, or issues that can arise. Then we'll try and identify some problems that might be happening because of absence of vocabulary governance in some areas. And then we'll try and identify some next steps. If there are issues around vocabulary governance, are there steps that we can take to improve that? And so more generally improve the management of information standards.
Adrian's going to be more on a vocabulary service rather than a vocabulary, but Adrian, can you introduce your session, please?
Sure, we're going to be looking at what role vocabulary services can play in addressing this proliferation, or at least reducing the need to just copy stuff. If you need to present a vocabulary to a local community for very good reasons, is there ways in which we can leave the content where it is, or at least have master copies of the content in known spots, and have a set of loosely coupled interoperable services that access the content in a more distributed way.
Thank you. And Jens or Kirsten, can you introduce your session, please?
Yeah, I can give a brief introduction. So physical samples or specimens, that already points at some of the problems, the difference between the two terms. They are at the heart of the earth and environmental sciences and many other disciplines too. And vocabularies used to describe and categorize physical samples are mostly discipline specific, but the metadata overlap across disciplines. And what we see is that there's more and more multidisciplinary work going on that draws upon the same samples. And on the other side, we also see big discipline agnostic services emerging that identify and catalog samples. So maybe there's a need for structure, how we can bring all of this together. So different disciplinary vocabularies can be cataloged, accessed, managed, and mapped to common metadata classes so that we can achieve a better interoperability than the having everything split into different disciplines and siloed.
Thank you. Erin, would you like to take over and tell us how we're going to get there? And then you'll be given a reminder of when to come back for the report back sessions. Thanks, Erin.
You got it. Okay, so we are looking at my KikoChat website, and each of these breakouts that was just described is, the title is here above the room name. So you can begin to go ahead and hop down to whatever room you want to go to, and we'll just say, I'm going to room 2 for breakout 2, and then up here in the upper left, the join Zoom for room 2 will be in the green button. And if you need to call in on the phone, I see a few call-in users. If you click on this help, the call-in information is right there. And so that is how you move around. And like I mentioned at the beginning, if you can observe other rooms and other docs, like you could come down to room 3 while you're still on the Zoom in room 2 and check out their notes. And if that looks interesting to you, you are more than welcome to hop from first Zoom to second Zoom and join that session. So we've set the KikoChat space up this way so that you have complete control over where you go. We'll be sending out reminders to kind of keep things moving through these rounds. And you can see the little red videos are starting to show up. And so that means that somebody is on the Zoom in that space. They're already going. So I think people are leaving this room right now. So I'm going to stop talking. So that's it. That's how you move around.
One last comment. Each breakout room has a document. So again, put your opinions down in the document, even if you don't necessarily stay for the whole thing. Okay, everyone, let's go to breakouts now.
See you guys later. Do we need to leave this one? You have to leave. Yeah, and you have to leave the main breakout to join the new breakouts. That's true. So it looks like we have a very KikoChat savvy set of people, and they're just jumping right in.
They're doing what they've been told to do.
I know.
Figuring it out.
Hey, Annie.
Been working.
Nice.
Yeah. Like I said, I was 100 people at this time of the day. I'm pretty impressed.
Pretty impressed. Yeah, me too. I was super impressed.
Well,
And a nice mix. Go ahead, Charlie.
Cousin from Australia, which is morning there.
Yeah, I think it's maybe a third are Australian and a third are and 2/3 are US. I think it's a pretty US crowd, but
we didn't explore this in depth. You can see our notes for what we did, but I think there's no controversy that we do need some coordination from organizations like ESIP, but there are others, TADWIC, RDA, CODATA, who should all also be talking on this topic and synchronizing strategy at a policy level so we can synchronize action. Once that's happening, we can rally effort and the human processes to barter this mapping exercise and create true interoperability in a technical sense can be realized. That's my 1 a.m. rant.
Thanks. CoData is definitely interested in this. Lewis, can you give us your yes, no, and if you are a yes, who?
It's a yes. Who is going to need to come out of, I think, a series of formalizing use cases which we've just gathered, okay, and understanding we're focusing on user interfaces here. So the core user interface is currently not suitable fit for purpose, really, for what people want to use it for. And I think we need to flesh out which organizations need to be involved through better understanding and quantifying the use cases. John Graybill, does that sound right? That captures
Yeah, I expressed it a little more generally as any organization that can contribute money or resources to development. And I think the use cases you described are the first point of development. Yes.
Okay, Rowan, seeing you got the most number of people at your session, are you a yes, no to go ahead? And if so, how, what?
Yes, we're very interested in going ahead. We identified, now, Leslie, was that the only question you had, or do you want me to talk further?
Or just very briefly, please.
Okay, we had some good presentations about governance, how governance works for particular providers. We talked about some problems that are coming up with governance. One of the issues that came up, we're interested in better tools for managing governance processes, so managing communications, making transparent the decision-making around decisions about adding, changing terms. There was discussion around the possibility of using, exploring GitHub for this purpose. And we put in some documents around that. And as for next steps, we're interested in looking further at GitHub and having a discussion within ESIP to address some of the issues that are coming up around governance, to learn from other domains, look at some good practices in approach to governments, maybe some lightweight checklists to help.
All right, so you're proposing to do it within ESIP first, okay? Sorry to cut you off.
And collaborate with other domains as we can.
Okay, Adrian, you were doing vocabulary services. Are you going ahead? And if so, how? Adrian, you still here?
Muted.
You're muted.
I'm muted on both points. It's not clear, Leslie, whether this would go ahead. I think we identified some very compelling, reasons and potential pathways ahead. Ours was a more specialist group. We had a much smaller, exclusive bunch of people there, but I'm not 100% sure that we identified enough vocabulary services that might be able to push this ahead. I think we did some very good work on looking at the social and financial and economic reasons why proliferation happens. And I think we identified a very important path forward between repositories of really master content And the end user tools, so well outside of services, the end user tools that are using vocabularies, where the greatest number of people will interface with the vocabulary, is not in a service, in a discovery or something like that. It's actually inside a tool. And I think we said that if we had good interoperability between tools and master repositories, then there's a very good direction ahead. So I think we did identify a very clear direction where technology and interoperability can help, but I don't think we had the right, we had any of the players that would be involved in that. So maybe if we can find the right people.
Okay, thank you. Kirsten and Jens, I think we've got a yes under yours.
Jens, okay, I'll take this on. Yes, there was easy consensus on moving forward with this. We had good discussions about the need for describing samples consistently, and also about the challenges of doing so, considering legacy descriptions versus ways to move into the future, and how to accommodate that, balancing between standardization that is relevant for future machine readable and processable metadata, but also leaving enough space to expand and take new perspectives and context for samples. We clearly stated that if nothing happens, we will keep floundering away, as was stated, and we would really lose out on making samples more discoverable, basically more fair. We have talked about ways forward and have discussed a technical sprint on vocabularies for samples that found general support. So we also talked actually even already about middleware helping with translation between vocabularies and classes and so on. So I think there's an important next step to participate in the session tomorrow that is trying to establish a physical samples cluster within ESIP. So it all fits together nicely, I think, so far.
Okay. So getting over time, but there's comments there that you can put in. Now, Charlie's kindly developed this sign up chart that starts on, what is it, whatever page it is, you've lost me. But you can see how each of you can put your name down and please your email and just tick whether, look, I'm interested in this if something goes ahead and happens. So can you all just consider filling that out, please?
Maybe we can take 1 or 2 minutes for everybody to head to the doc and make your selections.
Does everyone have
They have access yeah.
to the doc? Yep. Okay, great.
So it looks like that's happening.
Yeah, it's quickly extending.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask, can you please make sure you put your emails in, because it makes it so much easier for us to follow through with you. Takes too long to look them up all the time.
So while people are filling this in, I just want to say how cool I think this was. Leslie and Simon and I have been working together on the ESIP Down Under, ESIP US connections. And this is one of the first times that I think we've really had, you know, kind of seems like almost equal representation and a really rich discussion. So I think this seems like the next phase of whatever ESIP and E2SIP might look like. But thanks everybody for on the East Coast of the US for sticking around late tonight. And thanks to the Australians for all of the work helping to put this together.
Gosh, this is really good.
Absolutely. Thank you very much for the shout out there. But yeah, you know, obviously there's a group of us who've been particularly focusing in this space. And so I think it's pulled together nicely, along with the previous session.
I think it was one of those cases where we were having an issue in Australia, and so was it just the darn Australians, or are the issues we raised actually there and no one's talking about them?
No, this was fantastic, Leslie. Well organized. Thank you so much.
Thanks
Okay.
to Charlie for helping us
Charlie,
design this.
Charlie helped me design it because I just couldn't work out how to do it. So Charlie was fantastic, and Erin. Okay, so I guess what we're going to do now is, so you've got all your names, and I'll get back to the breakout people. It still seems, correct me if I'm wrong, that everyone's saying, let's just try and consolidate this within ESIP and then work out. And yeah, hopefully we can do this within existing ESIP clusters. But yes, I think you've all given us a lot of food for thought. Does anyone have any last comments they'd like to make, please?
I would just second the thanks to everybody that put this together.
And so Mark and Margaret, I'll just make one comment. We probably need to tie in what happened in your session with this session as well. Maybe we could have a call on that afterwards, because you had a lot of good material coming out of that.
Absolutely, Leslie. That sounds great. We're counting on it. Looking forward to it. It'll take us a couple of days, I think, to collate all the stuff, and then we should plan on a call.
Simon?
Absolutely. Count me in.
Great.
Okay.
Leslie, how do you want to, you want me to put all of the room's documents into the main document and give you the link, or you just want me to give you the folder?
I'd like someone, okay, so number one, because my copy button is playing up, I would love to make sure someone's copied the chat and put that into the main document, please. But the other thing I would like—
I have that.
Thank you, Erin. Actually, Charlie, we've already got the breakout documents linked to the main document.
That's right.
In several places.
That's right. And I didn't, yeah. And the those documents are shared, shareable with anyone with the link. So if anybody wants it, they should have no problem getting you sharing the link and they're getting access to it.
Cool.
Okay. This is John. Can I be a part of that discussion to combine the two?
You need to be.
Sessions. Oh, okay. Then I'm available to be part of that discussion.
Okay.
Thanks.
Gee, how do we do this? How many people want to be part of that document, that discussion where we combine them? How do we find this out?
Start on it.
Do I do that in the chat?
Where they speak up now.
Sorry, are we combining the Margaret and Mark session with this one? Is that what we're combining?
Yeah, I've just put it in the chat. Can you just put if you want to be part of it?
And we had some moderators, so Margaret and I will be sure to reach out for them if they happen to not be on this session, but I think most of them are.
Yeah.
Almost big enough for breakouts.
Yeah, gosh.
Sorry, Leslie.
Okay, so I think we're starting to lose everybody but the essential crowd. We also have an attendee list from this. So, you know, Leslie, as a last ditch, we can go out to the full group that joined here. But I think that those that wanted to consolidate, I see Kai, Ruth, Kirsten, Steve, Pierre, Simon. And I heard
we've got Kai to bring the average age down.
That's right. So anyway, I think this looks good. I have the chat, Leslie. I'll put that in the bottom.
Thanks.
And Charlie, how do we land the plane?
Isn't this, well, I was going to say happy hour, but not for those that are, this is the morning. So.
Time for second breakfast.
Happy hour.
Time for breakfast. I haven't even had it yet.
You can have a mimosa.
I think people in Australia should have scrambled eggs and people in the US should have frittatas.
That is perfect.
People in the US need a good glass of wine. At least on the East Coast.
Especially you East Coasters, yeah.
Sorry, Kirsten. I'm afraid I beat you to that.
And people in Australia can make a cup of coffee.
I should have known better.
Exactly.
You might get demonetized.
Okay, I'm heading off, guys.
Okay.
Bye, Simon.
Thanks for your help, Simon.
Thank you all.
Good to see you all. Nice to see you.
Nice to see
you, everyone.
Take care.
Bye. Adrian,
Bye.
John, thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks, Aaron.
Bye.